An HOA fined me $500 for a brand new shed they claimed was against the rules. I tried to be reasonable. I showed them their own bylaws, but their power-hungry president just laughed in my face and threatened to put a lien on my home. She gave me 48 hours to tear it down. What she didn't know is that my job is to literally write the rules for how cities are built. And in less than 48 hours, I filed a single document that didn't just save my shed. It put her entire neighborhood on the verge of being rezoned for factories and warehouses, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. There's a certain kind of peace you chase your entire career. For me, it wasn't about climbing the corporate ladder or seeing my name on a plaque. For 25 years, I worked as a senior urban planner for a sprawling, chaotic metropolis. My days were a whirlwind of zoning codes, traffic flow analysis, environmental impact reports, and endless public hearings. I've seen grown adults nearly come to blows over the placement of a stop sign. I've mediated disputes between billion-dollar developers and residents who just wanted to keep the afternoon sun in their backyard. My entire professional life was about managing the friction that occurs when people try to live together in dense communities. I was good at it, but it was exhausting. So, when my wife, Sarah, and I finally saved enough to buy our forever home, my only criteria were space, quiet, and a distinct lack of shared walls. We found it in a community called Oak Creek Estates. It was one of those master plan neighborhoods, built about 15 years ago, far enough from the city to feel like the countryside, but new enough that everything was still pristine. The lawns were impossibly green, the sidewalks were clean, and there was a genuine sense of order. The sales agent had mentioned the Homeowners Association, the HOA, presenting it as a benefit. The HOA ensures the community's aesthetic standards are maintained, which protects your property value, she'd chirped, handing us a slim binder labeled Bylaws and Covenants. I should have known better. My professional instincts should have screamed. In my line of work, an HOA is just a miniature, often dysfunctional, government run by people who weren't elected in any meaningful sense and who wield their minor authority with the fury of a deposed king. But I was tired. I saw the pool, the little park for the kids, the neat rows of houses, and I let my guard down. I skimmed the binder. The rules seemed standard enough. Grass height, no unregistered vehicles, trash cans out of sight. Nothing seemed too draconian. It felt like a small price to pay for the tranquility we were craving that we bought the house. It was a beautiful two-story colonial with a generous backyard that backed up to a small, protected greenbelt. For the first 6 months, it was everything we had dreamed of. Our neighbors were pleasant enough, offering a friendly wave as we got the mail. We settled in, enjoying the quiet hum of the suburbs, a sound so different from the city's constant roar. My first project for our new home was to install a garden shed. I'm a hobbyist woodworker, a passion that requires tools, space, and a tolerance for sawdust, things that don't belong inside a pristine suburban home. I did my due diligence. I reread the HOA binder. Section 4, subsection C, clearly stated, accessory structures, such as storage sheds, are permitted, provided they do not exceed 120 square feet in floor area, are no taller than 10 feet at the peak, and are situated in the rear of the property, no less than 5 feet from any property line. My plan was perfect. I'd ordered a high-quality, prefabricated shed, a tough shed model that was 10 by 10 feet, 100 square feet, well under the limit. It had a classic barn-style roof that peaked at 9 feet. It was a handsome dark gray color, designed to match the trim on our house. I even planned to put flower boxes under its windows. This wasn't some rusty metal box. It was an aesthetic enhancement. I measured the location in the backyard myself, placing the stakes a full 10 feet from the back and side fences, double the requirement. I wasn't just following the rules, I was exceeding them. The shed was delivered on a flatbed truck and assembled in a single afternoon by a professional crew. It looked fantastic. I spent the rest of the day organizing my tools, my heart swelling with a simple, profound joy. This was my little haven, my escape. As the sun set, I stood on my back patio, admiring my handiwork. That's when I saw her for the first time. A woman I'd seen walking the neighborhood before, always with a clipboard and a focused, purposeful stride. She was standing on the sidewalk behind my house, partially obscured by a decorative oak tree. She had a sour, pinched face and was staring intently at my new shed. She raised a small digital camera and took a picture. The click was barely audible, but in the quiet evening air, it sounded like a gunshot. She jotted something down on her clipboard, gave my house one last withering glare, and then continued her patrol. I felt a small, cold knot form in my stomach. I knew, with the certainty of a man who has sat through 1,000 contentious public meetings, that this was far from over. 2 days later, the letter arrived. It was in a crisp, white envelope with the Oak Creek Estates HOA logo embossed in the corner. It wasn't just left in the mailbox. It was tucked into the handle of our front door, a clear power move. My name was spelled correctly, which somehow made it feel more personal, more aggressive. I opened it and read. The language was cold and officious, a poor imitation of legal jargon. Dear Mr. Mark Peterson, it began. It has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee that an unapproved structure has been erected on your property at 124 Willow Lane. This structure, a storage shed, is in violation of HOA covenants. You are hereby issued a fine of $500. A further penalty of $50 per day will be assessed until the violation is rectified. You have 48 hours to remove the offending structure from your property. Failure to comply will result in further action, including the placement of a lien on your property. It was signed, in a sharp, angry script, Brenda Miller, President, Oak Creek Estates HOA. I read the letter twice, then a third time. My initial reaction wasn't anger, it was professional confusion. I had followed the rules to the letter. What violation was she even talking about? I walked to the bookshelf and pulled out the binder, the one the real estate agent had given us. I flipped to Section 4, Subsection C. The words were exactly as I remembered them. 120 square feet, 10 feet high, 5 feet from the property line. My shed met every single condition. This had to be a mistake. A simple clerical error. Brenda, the clipboard lady, must have been new, or perhaps she didn't have the latest version of the bylaws. I was a reasonable man. I would handle this reasonably. I found the number for the HOA in the binder and called. It went to a voicemail with Brenda's recorded voice, which was somehow even more grating than I had imagined. I left a calm, polite message, explaining who I was and that I believed there had been a misunderstanding regarding my new shed, and I'd be happy to discuss it. The next HOA meeting was that Thursday. I decided to attend. I brought the letter and my copy of the bylaws, ready to clear this up in a few minutes so I could get back to my life. The meeting was held in the small, sterile community clubhouse. About 15 residents were there, looking bored and resigned. Brenda sat at the head of a long folding table, flanked by 2 other board members who looked deeply uncomfortable, like hostages at their own trial. When the floor was opened for resident concerns, I stood up and introduced myself. I explained the situation calmly, holding up the letter. I believe there's been a mistake, I said, my voice even and professional. I received this notice regarding my new shed. However, according to the bylaws provided to me upon purchasing my home, the shed is in full compliance. I read Section 4, Subsection C, aloud. My shed is 100 square feet, 9 feet tall, and 10 feet from any property line. It meets all the stated requirements. Brenda looked at me with a thin, smug smile. It was the kind of smile that says, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Ah, yes, Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You have the old binder." She reached under the table and produced a much thicker, newer-looking binder. The bylaws were amended 2 years ago. The community voted on it. She flipped it open to a bookmark page. The new Section 4, Subsection C, requires that all, and I quote, external accessory structures must receive prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee, regardless of size. You failed to submit a plan for approval. Therefore, your structure is in violation. The fine stands. A low murmur went through the room. I looked around. No one met my gaze. They were all staring at the table, at their hands, anywhere but at me or at Brenda. They knew. They all knew this was how it worked here. I was never provided with this amended copy, I stated, keeping my composure. Neither by the previous homeowner nor the sales agent. How can a resident be expected to follow rules they are not aware of? Brenda's smile widened. It is the homeowner's responsibility to ensure they have the most current governing documents. Ignorance is not an excuse. The rule is the rule. But the shed itself complies with the physical requirements, even if I missed a procedural step that I wasn't informed of. Can't we just handle the paperwork retroactively? I can submit the plan for approval now. No, she said, the word sharp. And final. The committee has already reviewed the photos of your structure, and we have denied it. My professional composure finally began to crack. On what grounds? The color, she said, seeming to pluck the reason out of thin air. The dark gray is inconsistent with the community's color palette. It's too morose. We prefer earth tones. I was dumbfounded. The trim on my house, the very house the HOA had approved the plans for, was the exact same shade of dark gray. I pointed this out. Brenda waved a dismissive hand. Houses are one thing. Sheds are another. The point is, it was not approved. It must be removed. You have 48 hours from the issuance of the letter, which means you have until 5 p.m. tomorrow. After that, we will hire a contractor, and you will be billed for the removal and the lien. She looked at me, her eyes glittering with the pleasure of absolute, petty power. Any other new business? She asked the silent room. No one spoke. The meeting was adjourned. I walked home in a daze. The cool, evening air did nothing to quell the hot fire of indignation burning in my chest. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about a shed. This was about power. Brenda enjoyed this. She thrived on it. I had spent my entire career navigating complex systems, finding compromises, and building consensus. I had tried to apply those same principles here, assuming a baseline of rationality and good faith. I had been wrong. Brenda wasn't interested in reason. She was interested in obedience. That I sat down in my home office, the fine letter and the old bylaws on my desk. My mind, trained for decades to analyze systems and find leverage points, began to work. Logic had failed. Reason had failed. It was time to stop thinking like a homeowner and start thinking like an urban planner. It was time to fight bureaucracy with a better, bigger, and more crushing bureaucracy. Brenda wanted to play by the rules? Fine. We'd play by all of them. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I booted up my work computer and connected to the city and county GIS databases, geographic information systems. These were my tools of the trade. I had access to layers of data that most people never knew existed. Historical deeds, original plat maps, utility easements, and, most importantly, zoning. Histories. That I pulled up the parcel map for Oak Creek Estates. I started tracing its history backward. It was developed in the early 2000s, as I knew. But what was here before? I peeled back the digital layers. Farmland mostly. But then I found it. The original land parcel, before it was subdivided to create the neighborhood, had a very specific zoning designation from the 1980s. It was zoned M1, or mixed-use light industrial. This was common for land on the edge of a growing city back then. It was a flexible designation that could allow for anything from small warehouses to business parks to, yes, residential, but only under specific conditions. That I dug deeper, pulling the archived files from the County Planning Commission. Sure enough, the developer of Oak Creek Estates had been granted a conditional use permit to rezone the land for residential use. This is standard practice. But conditional use permits often come with, well, conditions. And sometimes they expired. My heart began to beat faster. I scrolled through the scanned pages of the 30-year-old document until I found the clause I was looking for. It was buried in the fine print. The permit was granted for a period of 15 years, at which point the developer, or the subsequent governing body, the HOA, was required to file for a permanent rezoning to a purely residential designation, like R1. If they failed to do so, the permit would expire and the zoning would, by default, revert to its original M1 designation. I checked the dates. The permit had expired 4 years ago. No one had ever filed the paperwork. For 4 years. Every single house in Oak Creek Estates, including Brenda's, had been technically non-compliant with the underlying zoning of the land they sat on. The entire neighborhood existed in a state of bureaucratic limbo, and nobody knew it. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Brenda was fining me for a shed that didn't match her preferred color palette, while her entire kingdom was built on a foundation of expired permits. She had kicked a beehive, not realizing the man she was stinging was a master beekeeper. The next morning, I didn't go near my shed with a sledgehammer. Instead, I put on a suit and drove to the city planning department. I walked past the public counter and, using my city employee ID, went into the back offices. I was a familiar face there. I spoke with my old colleague, Dave, the head of zoning administration. "Morning, Dave," I said, putting on my most collegial tone. "Got a weird one for you. I'm acting as a private citizen on this one." I explained the situation without emotion, simply laying out the facts. I showed him the expired permit, the original M1 zoning, and the lack of any application for a permanent change. Dave's eyes went wide. "Oh, boy," he breathed, scrolling through the files on his own computer. "You're right, Mark. This is a mess. It just fell through the cracks. It's been R1 in practice for so long. No one ever thought to check the source code, so to speak." "So what's the official zoning of Parcel 7A as of today?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Dave sighed. "Legally, it's M1, light industrial." "And what would be the process?" I asked, my voice calm and deliberate. "For a landowner within that parcel to, say, bring the land use into compliance with its official M1 zoning?" Dave looked at me, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. He knew my reputation. He knew I didn't bluff. "Well," he said, choosing his words carefully, "you'd file a formal application for a zoning compliance review. You'd propose a use for your property that is consistent with M1 zoning. That could be anything from a data storage facility to a small-scale assembly plant to, say, a distribution warehouse for a logistics company, or even a woodworking and fabrication shop." I asked innocently. "Especially a woodworking and fabrication shop," Dave confirmed. "That's a textbook M1 use. Once the application is filed, we are legally required to hold a public hearing to discuss the realignment of the entire parcel to its legal zoning designation. And notices for that public hearing would have to be posted throughout the affected area, every lamppost and street corner," Dave said with a grimace. "It would be a very interesting meeting." I thanked Dave for his time. I spent the next hour at a vacant desk, meticulously filling out application Z-24-118B, application for zoning compliance and land use realignment. For my proposed use, I wrote, establishment of a small-scale artisanal woodworking and metal fabrication facility. It was the most glorious, bureaucratic-sounding description for my hobby shop I could imagine. I paid the filing fee with my personal credit card and hand-delivered the completed application to the clerk. It was now an official public record. The gears of the great machine had begun to turn. I drove home, arriving at 4:30 p.m., just 30 minutes before Brenda's deadline. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw her standing on my lawn, arms crossed, with two large, burly men from a local demolition company. They were looking at my shed. Brenda's face lit up with triumphant fury when she saw me. Well, Peterson, cutting it a little close, aren't you? Your time is up. You can either move your things out of that eyesore right now, or my associates here will do it for you. Either way, it's coming down." I got out of my car, holding my briefcase. I didn't look at the demolition crew. I looked right at Brenda. "Good afternoon, Brenda," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You might want to call them off. Demolishing that shed would be a mistake." She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Oh, I don't think so. The mistake was yours, thinking you could defy the HOA. No, you see, the mistake would be demolishing a structure that, as of 11:42 a.m. this morning, is now a key piece of evidence in a pending municipal zoning application," I said, pulling a stamped, official copy of my application from my briefcase. "This is Z-24-118B. It's an application to bring my property into compliance with its legal M1 industrial zoning. That shed, or as I've called it in the application, the initial fabrication facility, is now part of an official city record. If you or your men so much as touch it, you'll be tampering with evidence in an active municipal proceeding. I imagine the city attorney would have some thoughts on that." I handed her the paper. Her smug expression melted as she read the words. Zoning compliance. Light industrial. Fabrication facility. Her face went from pink to white. The demolition guys looked at each other, confused. "You're bluffing," she stammered, but there was no conviction in her voice. "This is a residential neighborhood, is it?" I asked pleasantly. "According to the city's official records, it's an industrial park that's been illegally masquerading as a residential neighborhood for the past 4 years. But don't worry, I've taken the first step to correcting that oversight for everyone. The public hearing notices should be going up early next week. I imagine property values might be affected. Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. The two demolition workers, sensing they were about to step into a legal minefield far above their pay grade, started backing away toward their truck. You know what, lady, one of them said. I think we'll wait till you get this sorted out with the city. They got in their truck and drove away, leaving Brenda standing alone on my lawn, clutching the application as if it were a venomous snake. The fallout was, in a word, biblical. 2 days later, just as Dave had promised, official city notices on bright yellow cardstock were stapled to every lamppost in Oak Creek Estates. The news spread like wildfire. Panic ensued. People who had mortgages suddenly wondered if their bank would call in the loan on a house that was technically an illegal structure on industrial zone land. Residents who had prided themselves on their property values saw them evaporating overnight. My phone started ringing. It was my neighbors. Their tone was very different now. They were respectful, concerned, and desperate. The emergency HOA meeting was called that night. The clubhouse was packed. It was standing room only, a sea of anxious and angry faces. This time, when I walked in, a path cleared for me. I took a seat in the front row. All eyes were on Brenda, but she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The meeting was chaos. People were shouting, demanding answers. Brenda tried to control them, but her authority was gone. It had been built on a foundation of petty rules, and I had just dynamited that foundation with a zoning code. Finally, a neighbor named Tom, who lived across the street, stood up. Mark, he said, his voice pleading. We understand you're a planner. We had no idea. Is this for real? Are they really going to rezone us for factories? I stood up and addressed the room. The law is the law, I said, echoing Brenda's own words back at her. The land is zoned M1. My application is simply to bring my own property into compliance with that existing law. The city is obligated to consider it. The long-term solution is for the community to file for a permanent R1 residential zoning designation. It's a complicated and expensive process. It requires traffic studies, environmental reviews, legal fees. It's the process your HOA board should have completed 4 years ago, but failed to do. I looked directly at Brenda. Instead, they were apparently more concerned with the color of my shed. The full weight of her incompetence settled over the room. The residents weren't just angry at the situation anymore. They were angry at her. The public hearing at City Hall was a spectacle. Brenda and the HOA had hired a lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit who argued that this was all a ridiculous, retaliatory action. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't resort to theatrics. I calmly walked the planning commission through the legal facts, the expired permit, the reversion of the zoning, the plain language of the municipal code. I presented my application for my fabrication facility as a good faith effort by a citizen to follow the law as it was written. My esteemed colleague, I said, nodding to the HOA's lawyer, calls my action retaliatory. I call it compliance. The very thing the Oak Creek HOA demands of its residents. I am simply complying with a rule that is far more important than the color of a shed. If the commission wishes to deny my application, on what legal grounds would you do so? My proposed use is perfectly aligned with the M1 designation. To deny it would be arbitrary. To approve it is simply to follow your own rules. I had them, and they knew it. The commission had no choice but to vote to approve my application for the zoning compliance review, meaning the process to officially redesignate the neighborhood as industrial was now formally underway. That evening, my doorbell rang. It was Brenda. She looked defeated. The fire was gone from her eyes, replaced by a hollow desperation. What do you want? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. What do I want? I repeated, feigning surprise. Why, Brenda, I just want to be left alone to enjoy my property in peace. And I want to follow the rules, of course. Please, she begged. Withdraw the application. We'll do anything. The residents, they're ready to sue the board into oblivion. The bank is making threats about our loans. You've destroyed us. You did this, Brenda, I said, my voice cold as ice. You did this with your petty tyranny and your love of power. You picked a fight over a shed with a man who designs cities for a living. You have no one to blame but yourself. I let her stand there in silence for a long moment. Then, I gave her my terms. First, I said, the HOA will issue a formal, written apology to me and my wife. Second, the $500 fine is rescinded, and the HOA will pay me $2,000 to cover my application fees and my time. Third, the current HOA board, including you, will resign, effective immediately, and you will be barred from ever serving on the board again. Fourth, a vote will be held to immediately dissolve the Oak Creek Estates HOA entirely, freeing this neighborhood from this nonsense once and for all. Once all those conditions are met and verified, I will withdraw my application, and you can begin the long, expensive process of fixing the mess you made. She just nodded, tears welling in her eyes. A week later, a check for $2,000 was delivered to my house, along with a written apology. A notice was posted announcing the dissolution of the HOA, pending a resident vote that passed with 98% approval. Brenda Miller sold her house and was gone within 2 months. And my shed? It's still there. It's a beautiful dark gray. I've even added the flower boxes. It's my haven, my escape. But it's also a monument. A monument to the fact that if you're going to wield the power of the rules against someone, you had better be absolutely certain they don't know the rules better than you do.